Jekyll and Hyde, Two Monsters, The Fear of Our Nature by Rachel Espinosa. Society's everyday lives can often be overwhelming as news stations pour in stories about murders, kidnappings, sexual assault, and homicides. The idea of evil in our humanity seems to be exceedingly aggressive as there is constantly a new crime being reported. Society continues to neglect and be petrified by the notion that anyone is capable of being evil. Robert Louis Stevenson's novel The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde has daringly confronted the perplexing social structure and fears prevalent in the Victorian era that still have a hold on modern-day society. In this paper, I will explain how both Jekyll and Hyde display the harsh ugliness of the duality in human nature as we possess the ability of good and bad by analyzing Erica McChrystal's critical essay, Hyde as a Monster Villain, revolving the duplexity in addition to the psychological and philosophical scholarly sources in order to demonstrate how Stevenson's novel illustrates the consequences of repressing the disregarded darkness of humans. Background: The Victorian era played a key role in Stevenson's novel as it was a revolutionary time, specifically for society and science. It was a time where many social and moral standards were heavily enforced, while simultaneously rapidly changing with new ideas and breakthroughs for both society and science. Scientific discoveries like Charles Darwin's theories of evolution were groundbreaking and further fueled the fear of humanity's beastly beginnings being traits carried into future generations by degenerate people. Unlike today's modern society, the Victorian era had a stricter and higher standard of moral and social codes, which often led to a repressive nature. Class divides were striking as there were mainly only the upper wealthy upper class and the working class. McChrystal states Hyde exists as a Gothic villain who embodies the abject living conditions of the working class. Due to class divides, the working class was often dehumanized and viewed as criminals, dangerous, and often degenerates. Stevenson took inspiration from these factors as he produced Hyde into a Gothic and animalistic character and Jekyll into a more respected figure as a doctor. Context: Due to the harsh and rigid social structure of the Victorian era, the repression of thoughts, acts, and desires were prevalent. Thoughts and desires were often labeled as amiss or immoral, were expected to be suppressed, and failure in doing so resulted in social rejection. The novel mirrors a standard in Dr. Jekyll's internal battle with his dark urges and speaks to how many were forced to adhere to the standards. Stevenson had a personal experience with the trend of repression as he suffered with addiction and mental illness, which gave him a deeper understanding on battling with one's darker self. Since class divides formed a harsh view on the lower class, it was a struggle for society to accept anyone outside of their acceptable group could be capable of evil and bad. Those outcasted for being different or non-conforming were the embodiments of fear of degeneracy. Society often has a flawed way of determining evil, basing it on appearance and behavior on what they deem as socially unacceptable. Humanity often sorts its population into two main groups, the inner circle and the outer circle. This phenomenon is known as the us versus them effect. As society forms these in/out groups, which are good and bad, the population prefers to only be associated by the in-group and hold biased beliefs towards the out-group. It is noticed as Hyde's character is described as Gothic, grotesque, barbaric, and animalistic comparable to his appearance and behavior. Erica McChrystal states Hyde's animalistic and indescribable body puts him in opposition to a more traditional standardized image of man. The disgust that other characters feel upon seeing him amounts to judgment and rejection from acceptable society. Hyde is viewed as repulsive due to firstly his appearance. It is implied that just by seeing him, society already casts him to the other group. Due to the violation of acceptable physical standards of society, Hyde was met with judgment and rejection from the world. This mirrors reality as the world, as people who don't meet society's physical standards are associated with the belief that they are bad, immoral, and evil. Thus, they are outcasted and ostracized. Dr. Jekyll is a byproduct of society's flawed judgment, as despite Dr. Jekyll and Hyde being an extension of one another, Dr. Jekyll is viewed as respectable and someone incapable of doing evil due to his appearance and behavior, when in reality Dr. Jekyll and Hyde are just as equally evil. People who are labeled as outcasts and degenerates are not the only ones capable of being evil. Many times those who commit the most evil crimes and acts are those who society would least expect. Criminals that debunk society's flawed thought process are Ted Bundy, who murdered, raped, and kidnapped a multitude of women. Ted Bundy was often described as charming, trustworthy, and charismatic prior to his conviction. To society and women, Ted Bundy appeared to be an attractive and nice guy. It was to his advantage that he was able to manipulate women into their death, as many would least expect a normal guy like Ted Bundy, to be so evil. This is known as the halo effect, which is a psychological phenomenon when a positive impression leads to positive judgments. The University of Michigan explains the halo effect, saying, if we like a person, we often assume that those attributes of the person about which we know little about are also favorable. Society has weaved the halo effect into his mindset, believing that only people who are conforming into the in-group are capable of being good, while holding biased opinions towards the non-conforming group. School teachers, doctors, counselors are all people who are well respected but can be criminals. Dr. Jekyll is the embodiment of society's thought process, as he is known for being wealthy, charitable, and respected, but nobody would have suspected that Dr. Jekyll was evil or even connected to Mr. Hyde. Everyone is capable of both good and evil, as morality is variable depending on situations. In everyday life, we are constantly met with choices and opportunities. Some can be bad and some can be good. They can hurt us, or benefit us and hurt other people. Paul Kurtz, a philosophy professor for the State University of New York at Buffalo, explains, life does not always present us with clear-cut good or bad, right or wrong choices. Sometimes it is the choice between the lesser of two evils. Life often meets us with choices that can benefit us and harm others on big or small scales, as everyone has done something they know that isn't fully right. This is why evilness and goodness is not often pure. It is sometimes on a scale. For instance, Dr. Jekyll has the notion that he is not as evil comparable to Mr. Hyde. McChrystal writes, Jekyll assumes that he is the good in contrast to Hyde's evil. Jekyll attempts to justify and comfort himself on his own evil doings by comparing them to Hyde's, as Hyde has done worse. When Jekyll fails to realize until the end of the novella is that Jekyll and Hyde are one. Thus, Hyde's evil doings are the same evilness as the well-respected, charitable, wealthy Jekyll. Although Hyde is viewed as degenerate, barbaric, and low class, he is the exact same as Jekyll. Suppressing and rejecting evilness only makes it uncontrollable, and the desires and urges become ceasing. Suppression was a common theme in the Victorian era due to the strict and moral social codes, especially to topics that were deemed unacceptable or shameful, such as sexuality, emotions, and current controversies. These are all topics that outside of the Victorian era were also pushed to be suppressed and rejected by society. For instance, being a homosexual was historically a topic that was shameful and taboo. Homosexuals were forced to lie and would often be rejected and ostracized, becoming the outgroup of society. Similarly, major historical events were also suppressed, like the Holocaust, which is one of the largest genocides and darkest times of world history, was suppressed by burning and destructing evidence by Nazi officials. Later, it was repressed by the event not being thoroughly taught and acknowledged, which often leads to people not believing the event was real. The repression of these subjects leads to many conflicts in history, as many died to freely express their sexual identity, and lack of awareness led to similar genocides. Stevenson stresses the danger of suppression of evilness as Dr. Jekyll battles with his primal beastly evil urges of killing and acting wild with no guilt. It is when Hyde takes shape as the physical embodiment of Dr. Jekyll's shameful evil urges. Dr. Jekyll attempts to take control of Hyde through Jekyll evolving into Hyde as using a potion. Quickly, Dr. Jekyll loses control of Hyde as the transformations get out of hand. The transformation has gone so berserk that Jekyll is in fear of his own life and others. Thus, he is forced to end his life in order to fully take control of Hyde. Some may believe that only evil is in certain people and that not all humans can be capable of evil. This view on human nature is known as optimism, as believing that human nature is predominantly good. Although this point is understandable, it is true that there are many people with good hearts who follow strict moral codes and people who closely follow religious morals. There may even be the unique exception, such as a person with antisocial personality disorder, or most commonly described as psychopaths. However, as earlier noted, no one is truly good or evil, and judging somebody just because they have a personality disorder is what's flawed with society. Conclusion. Ultimately, human nature in terms of morality is one of the most complex parts of humanity, as humans are not only have the capability of being good and evil, but morally struggle day to day on large and small scales. Often these battles are the byproduct of hypercritical society and can be one demise. Stevenson's novel reflects humanity's ambivalence in morality and its simultaneously fear of its beastly nature, as the novel illustrates the consequences of ignorance in humanity's moral powers and weaknesses.